Alrighty, yo, what is going on, everybody? It's your boy, Mr. DDG94, back with another reaction video. Today, we finna react to the Y2K era, the Y2K attitude era, a cultural middle finger. The Y2K attitude era. They're not just talking about WWE, they talking about it as a cultural, as the culture at the time. So the Y2K era, the era that I pretty much grew up in. Without further ado, let's get right into it.
In the mid-1990s, the WWE, then known as the WWF, was going through its worst commercial period in history. Although they had some excellent wrestlers like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, the company just couldn't find a style that appealed to the 90s consumer. And as a result, they pushed away millions of fans. By 1997, the WWF reached its breaking point. Not only were they on the verge of bankruptcy, but to make matters worse, their rival, WCW, was dominating them in the ratings. With the imminent destruction of his family business looming, Vince McMahon did what he always did best: stole someone else's idea. And so, the WWF took inspiration from the counterculture and extreme style of ECW and repackaged it for a mainstream audience. Their new product featured provocative, Crash TV-style storylines and starred anti-hero characters like the toughest SOB alive, Stone Cold Steve Austin. As a result, Monday Night Raw became one of the hottest shows on TV. The WWF coined this boom period, which lasted from 1997 to 2001, as the Attitude Era. This term has been widely used for years among wrestling fans, but I believe that it has a lot of utility outside of the world of professional wrestling, because in the late 90s and early 2000s, almost every part of pop culture was engulfed in an attitude era of its own. During that time, there was an onslaught of offensive and controversial media that was mainly targeted at a young male audience. There was Crash TV, adult cartoons, raunchy teen comedies, and tons of CDs with that parental advisory label. From roughly 1997 to 2004, we experienced a period of anti-political correctness that
I want to say till 2007. Around 2008, everything started to tone down.
Existed in stark contrast to what we have today. So spike your hair, grab your skateboard, and raise that middle finger high. It's time to talk about
Or for all my niggas, get your Rockaware, your Sean John, your Anichi, get your hats with the do-rags under them, your headbands, your visors, turn them upside down and cock it to the side. Get your FUBU out and let's go crazy, bruh.
The Y2K attitude era. First, let's establish where this era came from. Since there's no consensus correct answer on the topic, here's my theory. At the dawn of the 1990s, youth culture was being force-fed a corny, artificial culture that was an amalgamation of all of the worst trends from the 1980s. This artificial culture was set ablaze when Nirvana burst onto the scene with Nevermind and opened the floodgates for a counterculture movement that authentically reflected the values of the younger generation. This movement came in two forms: dark and serious, and lighthearted and satirical. But by the mid-90s, things got too real when the world lost powerful voices like Kurt Cobain and Tupac in short succession. Things were getting too serious, and the culture was ready to lighten up. So by then, the lighter, satirical side of 90s counterculture that kept building momentum was ready to explode. And in my eyes, the tongue-in-cheek spirit of the times had one undeniable founder. I'm sure you all know about The Simpsons, but in short, it's an animated sitcom that follows the adventures of a lovingly dysfunctional, middle-class American family. It featured stories that deconstructed the American dream and satirized pop culture with its witty and innovative writing. Each episode, which featured the greatest supporting cast on TV, created so many memorable moments and quotable lines that weaved their way into the fabric of American culture. Every member of the Simpsons family became icons, but the most popular was their mischievous, prankster son, Bart Simpson. In many ways, Bart Simpson was like the mascot of 90s rebelliousness. His too cool for school persona was the foundation of everything that the Attitude Era was built on. because when you think about it, everything we'll talk about in this video was aimed at the many Bart Simpsons of the world. And so, the Simpsons pressed the button on the Attitude rocket ship and sent it into orbit. So now that we know where the Attitude Era came from, what was it all about? Honestly, it isn't really that complicated. In the words of modern-day philosopher William Frederick Durst, "My generation, we don't give a f." Sadly, I have to give a f since I'm a YouTuber in 2024. Either way, that was the mantra that inspired a generation of meddling kids. If you were an Attitude Era kid, you didn't care what anyone thought. You were a free spirit who would never conform to anything, just like all of your friends. Attitude Era content was shocking and offensive, with foul-mouthed toilet humor that corrupted the fragile minds of children everywhere, and we loved every second of it. Another major part of the trend was reference humor. You see, the monoculture identity in the late 90s and early 2000s was much stronger than it is now. The big movies and music of that time were inescapable, and unless you were living under a rock, you knew what was happening. And that's where all the pop culture reference jokes came in. If you want to experience the most reference humor per minute, watch some early episodes of Family Guy. After that, go listen to 1 Week by Bare Naked Ladies. And then try not to notice that Stephen Page kind of looks like a slim Peter Griffin. See? Reference humor. Now that we know what the Attitude Era stood for, it's time we cover all the bases. There was an overwhelming amount of shock content back then, and if I spoke about everything, this would be one of those 20-hour video essays. Instead, I'll cover what I feel were the main pieces of the Attitude Era in every area of pop culture. So grab your popcorn and let's jump into the movies. When you talk about edgy Y2K era movies, the obvious place to start is Fight Club. Fight Club represented the angst that a generation of young men felt at that time. The need to escape from the social pressure of following the same curated consumerist lifestyle as everyone else. The desire to smash up your cubicle and to live freely. A world that had no outlet for the primal rage that every man feels deep down. Everything about Fight Club, from its grimy aesthetic to its satirical humor, tapped into the anti-establishment spirit of that time. And while movies like Fight Club represented the aggressive side of the Attitude Era, its steez was definitely the comedies. In the 90s, a new generation of comedians burst onto the scene and became major movie stars. The one who brought the most attitude to the big screen was definitely Adam Sandler. From the mid-90s onward, Sandler was on fire with a string of hit comedies like Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore, and The Waterboy. These movies offered a lowbrow and crude, yet sincere brand of comedy. They were loud, in-your-face, and hilarious. Sandler was almost deceptively funny, with his trademark ability to transfer from a sweet, lovable guy into a rage-filled psychopath on a moment's notice. His movies inspired a frat boy era of comedy that starred many of his SNL friends. And aside from those, there were two specific comedy genres that blew up at that time. The first were the parody/spoof movies. This run started with Mike Myers' 1997 film, Austin Powers: International Man of Mystery. Austin Powers was a spoof of the old James Bond movies and the psychedelia era in general. Its brand of wacky humor was so funny that the series gained a life of its own, and people forgot that it was even a parody. The early 2000s also had spoofs the whole family could enjoy, like another Mike Myers classic, Shrek. Shrek featured potty humor for kids and tons of dirty jokes for their parents that barely rode the PG line. It was so funny to see DreamWorks take the piss out of Disney after their animated golden age. But for better or for worse, the Y2K parodies were truly defined by one movie. Scary Movie. 2000's Scary Movie roasted popular horror movies of the time by recreating their scenes in the most ridiculous way possible. It was so stupid and over the top that you just had to laugh. I mean, who can forget Ghostface getting high with Shorty or Brenda getting murdered in the theater? The franchise was extremely successful and inspired a string of god-awful parody movies that should all be erased from existence. Except for you, Not Another Teen Movie. You can stay. And speaking of teen movies, one series undeniably ruled the Attitude Era. American Pie. By 1999, it had been a while since there were any classic R-rated teen comedies. Then American Pie came and filled that hole perfectly.
Hey,
The first
yo.
movie is mostly remembered for its raunchy humor, but it also had relatable and sweet moments. So many things from the movie, like the term MILF and characters like Stifler, quickly entered the public consciousness. It also had a killer soundtrack that really captured the sound of that time. The success of American Pie led to a boom of raunchy teen comedies in the early aughts. These movies all upped the ante on the sex jokes and the nudity, which created a universal memory for anyone who grew up back then. Waiting for the boobie scene with your friends and having someone's mom walk in at the exact moment that they appeared. And just as many classics of the Attitude Era appeared on the television. Attitude Era TV was jam-packed with wild programming that was designed to grab your attention. And where better to start with than the face of car crash TV, The Jerry Springer Show. The Jerry Springer Show was the epitome of a televised dumpster fire. Something we all pretended to be above, but secretly loved. The space that's currently occupied by YouTube drama channels. Springer featured a number of segments that displayed the decay of American values for all the world to see. At the end of the show, Jerry always had a final thought monologue where he instilled some kind of wisdom out of the chaos. It's funny how, despite the depravity around him, Springer always seemed like a decent guy. I think it's because he was honest about what his show was and wasn't trying to act like some benevolent savior like Dr. Phil. Shows like Jerry Springer opened the door for more shock TV. At the time, the king of shock had to be Tom Green, who had a reality show on MTV where he pulled insane pranks on the public. My favorite being the time he ordered a Subway sandwich that would make Shaggy and Scooby blush. But while Tom Green was great, the kings of MTV were definitely Jackass. Jackass was a reality comedy show that featured a group of guys who acted like, well, jackasses. Their main activities consisted of doing insane stunts, gross-out dares, pranks, and tormenting Bam's family. Its awesome crew was led by the three musketeers of jackassery. First, you had Knoxville, the leader who was kind of like a daredevil version of Jack Nicholson. Then there was Steve-O, who was a chill stoner dude who would do any insane stunt imaginable. And lastly, you had the heartthrob skater punk of the group, Bam Margera. Words cannot describe how cool these guys were at the time. They were universally beloved by men and women everywhere and inspired every group of kids to do their own backyard stunts. On the opposite end of reality TV, the Attitude Era featured a ton of adult cartoons, which were watched religiously by children everywhere. While these cartoons followed the path that was set by The Simpsons, by the late 90s, they made their forefather look tame by comparison. There were so many classics like King of the Hill, Family Guy, and Futurama, but there's one cartoon that unquestionably had the most attitude. Trey Parker and Matt Stone's South Park. South Park followed the adventures of four grade school friends and their quiet lives in small-town America. It depicted a number of wholesome situations like the kids getting probed by aliens, talking to a sentient piece of poop, and constantly getting Kenny killed. All of that is to say, the show represented everything that the Attitude Era stood for. Even its extremely simplistic art style was the definition of not giving a crap. South Park wasn't afraid to make fun of anyone, which constantly got it in hot water. But this controversy only fueled its popularity and quickly made it a pop culture phenomenon. Every single friend group had at least one person who could do a decent Cartman impression. South Park was largely responsible for forming the messed up sense of humor of a generation. Aside from the heavy hitters, there were also a number of coming-of-age cartoons aimed at a 20-somethings audience like Mission Hill and Clone High. My favorite of these was Undergrads. Undergrads was a slice-of-life show that followed a group of college friends and perfectly captured the spirit of that time. I highly recommend it as like a time machine of Y2K young adult culture. Even kids shows at that time like Disney's Recess had to bring some G-rated attitude. And most strange of all, somehow Japanese animation got caught up in the trend. In the late 90s and early 2000s, anime started to gain a foothold in North America. Because of that, many English dubs from that time period were modified to contain tons of Y2K attitude.
That's because these animations, I should say, were above the other animations. Because a lot of the cartoons that we were used to watching, the violence got taken out. But with Dragon Ball Z and other type of animes and stuff like that, they didn't take the violence out. We got to see motherfuckers get punched in the face. We got to see black eyes, blood coming off their lips and shit. They face all scruffed up. Like, that's why we loved it so much. Because it was like, yo, this is where the violence is. This is what I want to see.
Attitude. That's why I'll always associate Dragon Ball Z with that time period. When you get down to it, there was a mind-boggling amount of Attitude Era TV. You had sitcoms like Malcolm in the Middle, skit comedy shows like Chappelle's Show, insane game shows like Fear Factor, weird comedy shows like Crank Yankers, the list goes on. And the Attitude even made its way to the world of sports. At the turn of the millennium, even major American sports had attitude. In the NHL, tough guys like Ty Domi were fan favorites. The MLB had its home run race, which featured completely natural 250-pound mounds of muscle, regularly hitting 50 home runs a year. But of the major American sports, the NBA definitely had the most attitude. In the late 90s, Dennis Rodman dominated the boards on the court and dominated the tabloids off it. And in the early 2000s, Allen Iverson became the face of the hip-hop and basketball crossover. And
the GOAT. The GOAT.
then there was Ron Artest, but more on him later. But
we don't want to get started on Mr. Ron Artest here. Hey, I'm sorry, Meta World Peace. We don't want to get started on Mr. Meta World Peace here.
the biggest trend that emerged was the explosion of extreme sports. Extreme sports became a major force in the 1990s, largely due to the X Games that were broadcasted nationally on ESPN. Many extreme sports like motocross, BMX, scooters, and even soap shoes all had their time in the limelight, but none of them caught as much air as skateboarding. Skateboarding was the choice pastime for rebel kids throughout the 90s and kept building momentum in underground circles. This was largely due to a number of awesome tapes of skaters doing innovative tricks that pushed the sport further. But everything changed in 1999 when Tony Hawk hit the first 900 at the X Games. It was a legendary moment that catapulted skateboarding into a mainstream juggernaut. Thanks to Hawk, skateboards ruled the early 2000s counterculture landscape. From then on, they were featured in every music video, the pros became celebrities, and the industry was making money hand over fist. Skateboarding has made an awesome comeback in the 2020s, but it's hard to say if it will ever touch the heights of the Y2K years again. And that's something you could also say about professional wrestling. Yeah, I know, pro wrestling isn't a real sport, but it's still real to me, damn it. The Attitude Era of wrestling saw the WWF at its creative and commercial apex. At that time, WWF Raw wasn't just a part of the culture. In many ways, it created it. When I look back at the Crash TV era of wrestling, while the in-ring product wasn't that great, it made up for it with its balls-to-the-walls excitement. Every episode of Raw was must-watch TV. The most important factor was the countless list of iconic wrestlers. At the very top, you had the beer-drinking, cussing, Stone Cold Steve Austin. What? There was also The Rock, Undertaker, Mankind, and a slew of secondary characters who became household names. Even China was more famous in 1999 than most of the top wrestlers are today. I hope that someday wrestling reaches those kind of heights again. But all of these sports had one thing in common. They were each immortalized by their amazing adaptations in the video games. In the 90s, there were a number of edgy games that pushed the violent and obscene content to new levels. This trend started with the 1-2 punch of Doom and Mortal Kombat, which both featured shocking content for the time. Once the PlayStation era was in full effect, Attitude had completely taken over video games. There were hundreds of games in this vein, so for the time being, I'll focus on 3 that captured the rebellious spirit of that time. The first of these games came from an unlikely source, the Nintendo 64. Unlike Sony and Sega, Nintendo usually kept things family-friendly, but that didn't mean that its third-party publishers had to stick to that mantra. By the mid-90s, Rare Games had a stranglehold on the Big N after releasing the mega-successful Donkey Kong Country series. This gave them leverage to insert their brand of edgy and wacky humor into their games. In 2001, they turned the edginess up to 11 with Conker's Bad Fur Day. Conker's was like an assault on gaming mascots. It mixed the adorable aesthetic of children's games with the most vulgar content imaginable. It featured its cute, tasteless, alcoholic main character fighting a heap of crap and pissing on things in a nightclub. Tons of fun for the whole family. But Conkers was just the tip of the edgy iceberg. 2001 also saw the release of one of the most controversial games of all time, GTA 3. With the power of the PS2, Rockstar finally brought their violent crime game to the third dimension. This caused moral panic everywhere. GTA 3 brought the same sort of pop culture satire and violence as the previous games, but the ability to kill random people in 3D was so much more visceral. The controversy and incredibly fun gameplay loop of GTA 3 caused the series to go to the stratosphere. Its legendary follow-ups, Vice City and San Andreas, both pushed the provocative content even further. By San Andreas, the ESRB rating could barely fit all of the warning labels on the box. With that said, Attitude Era games weren't all about crude humor and violence. They were also about adrenaline-fueled fun, and nothing represented that better than the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater franchise. During the game's creation, Activision involved Hawk heavily in the creative process, which resulted in a game that authentically reflected skater culture. Each level felt like you were making your own skate tape, with classic punk rock tracks playing in the background. Because of this game, the opening riff of Goldfinger's Superman was burned into the minds of millions of people. Its fun, arcadey gameplay made it a blast to play alone and with friends, and the first 4 games became bona fide classics. The series represented the synergy of the Attitude Era with its visual style, music, and tons of pop culture references. And as I said before, one of the greatest parts of the game was definitely the music. When grunge and gangster rap stepped away from the limelight, 2 major trends rose in their wake. The first trend was a wave of squeaky clean teen pop that targeted families and teenage girls. Girl power became a major theme, with girl groups like the Spice Girls, and a new wave of pop princesses like Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera. But there was another side that became the nemesis of edgy kids everywhere: the boy bands. A group of 5 handsome dudes who sang and danced their way into the hearts and pants of women everywhere. And this, of course, pissed off angsty guys to no end. And that's where the second major music trend kicked in. A wave of angst-filled music for guys that was like a counterattack on teen pop. And that was the music that defined the Attitude Era. Almost every music genre in the alternative space had some degree of attitude, but the 2 that made the biggest splash were pop punk and nu metal. So let's start the conversation with pop punk. And where better to start than the California dudes who started the Y2K era of pop punk, Blink-182. After getting their start in the California punk scene, Blink started making major headway with their single, Damn It. And by 1999, they were mainstream superstars with their album, Enema of the State. That year, they were prominently featured in American Pie and were on constant rotation on MTV. Their biggest video was All the Small Things, which was a hilarious parody of all the big boy band videos. What made Blink so great was their catchy, energy-filled songs that had coming-of-age themes that their audience could relate to. The success of Blink-182 led to bands like Sum 41, Simple Plan, and Good Charlotte blowing up and pop punk having its biggest period of commercial success. At the same time, nu metal was also in a boom period. The face of nu metal at the turn of the millennium was definitely Limp Bizkit. Limp Bizkit also owed a lot of their popularity to MTV. They gained a lot of notoriety due to the controversial and outspoken nature of their frontman, Fred Durst. Although Durst became a bit of a punchline in later years, he was undeniably charismatic and was absolutely everywhere for a couple of years. Watching the way he held the audience at Woodstock '99 in the palm of his hand still gives me chills, although probably not the greatest idea. Limp Bizkit had tons of great hits that really captured that primal, testosterone-fueled rage that most teenagers feel at some point. But sometimes their antics got them into trouble, like when they landed in the crosshairs of the artist who, in my opinion, was the face of Attitude Era music, Eminem. When Eminem burst onto the scene, he was a true original. And it wasn't just because he was a white rapper. His music addressed topics like his poor upbringing and family issues in a way that no one else really did. He wore his life and his
He did the same shit that damn near every other rapper did. DMX, Jay-Z, Biggie, Tupac, they all did the same thing, bro. This is not nothing new. White people, come here, white people. Stop speaking on the culture if you don't understand the culture. We understand. You only listen to Eminem and you don't listen to nobody else. We understand. But to say he did something original that every other rapper has done before him, talk about their upbringing and what got them here and where they at now in life, and go through their pain and trauma and all this other shit. We understand you didn't like hip hop. It was too black for you. And then a white guy comes in and is like, oh, I like it now. All right, it's cool. But don't speak on the culture, my nigga. Don't. Stop it.
Problems on his sleeve and felt very authentic. And with his alter ego, Slim Shady, he delivered some of the most insane lyrics ever put on paper. But what made him the king of Attitude Era music was how he torched pop culture. Eminem verbally bitch-slapped so many celebrities with such precision that nobody wanted a piece of him. His incredible talent, controversial image, and the amazing production of Dr. Dre created the perfect storm that made Eminem the biggest artist of the 2000s. Eminem was perhaps the co-king of controversy at that time, a title he shared with Marilyn Manson. And them joining forces for a performance of The Way I Am was a peak Attitude Era moment. And now that I've gone through all of its most important aspects, there's one question that remains. What the hell happened to the Attitude Era? As the old saying goes, it's better to burn out than to fade away. And unfortunately, the Attitude Era is something that faded away into a distant memory. It went straight to DVD around the same time the American Pie franchise did. The late 2000s had some highlights, but by and large, the bad outweighed the good. So what exactly happened? The answer is pretty simple. All of the mischievous little Bart Simpsons of the world grew up to be responsible, irresponsible adults. Sum 41 once famously said that they didn't want to become a victim of the conformity, and a decade later, their drummer was a real estate agent. I mean, if rock stars couldn't even stay young forever, then what hope did the rest of us have? Aside from the obvious, there were a cascading number of reasons that political correctness eventually won the culture war. So let me do what I do best and list them off. The first major blow was the Columbine shootings in 1999. Both of the shooters were fans of edgy video games, movies, and music, and their actions made that content public enemy number one. Eventually, things went too far. A perfect example of this is the Bum Fights video series, in which a sociopathic group of teenagers paid homeless people to do dangerous and degrading stunts for as little as a bottle of booze. Bum Fights was truly awful and should never have existed, but I'm not gonna lie, the Bum Fights guy punking Dr. Phil will always be classic. In 2002, the WWF got the F out, and in many ways, the fun went with it. But the edgy programming remained until the heinous acts of Chris Benoit in 2007 forced them to go in a different direction. This tragedy left a permanent stain on the wrestling business, and the WWE was never the same. The world of sports cracked down on unprofessional conduct in 2004, when members of the Indiana Pacers brawled with Detroit Pistons fans live on television, a night that went down in infamy, known
the most litest night in sports history. I don't care what anybody say. I don't care how ignorant you think I am. This was the greatest sports spectacle to ever fucking happen. If it ever happens again, it'll be 10 times litter than it was the first time because of social media. But man, the Malice at the Palace was, yo, you just had to be there. You just had to be there.
As Malice at the Palace. Rockstar Games came under major fire after the hot coffee scandal, when code for a sex minigame was found in the San Andreas game files. After this incident, Rockstar Games lost a lot of its edge, although they managed to sneak in one more underrated Attitude Era game with Bully. The final straw for me was the death of Jackass member Ryan Dunn in 2011. Jackass just never felt the same after that. When you look at all of these factors, it makes sense why that era faded from the mainstream into obscurity. In the late 2000s, Attitude retreated to the internet for a while, until all of the normies showed up and ruined things here too. But that's a story for another day. So with all of that said, did the Attitude Era age well? I think that depends entirely on your perspective. If you're comparing it to modern day sensibilities, it clearly aged horribly. But For my personal taste, it was one of the best periods of content in history. If I'm being honest, it feels like nothing is really made for me anymore. I haven't truly laughed at a comedy in ages, and that's what the Attitude Era gave me. It wasn't political, and it wasn't divisive. We could all laugh together about a guy humping a pie or getting an x-ray after shoving a toy car up his ass. Is it just me, or does most of the stuff that comes out now kind of suck? Well,
nope, you're not wrong, Chief. Everything sucks. Everything sucks now. No fun, there's no dark humor no more. Everything is tame now. Everything gotta be, oh, you can't say that. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, we gotta censor you. Oh, if you do it again, we're gonna get you. We're gonna cancel you, buddy. I'm still putting 2 middle fingers in the air like I just don't care. You feel me? 2 middle fingers in the air like I just don't care. Cause I come from an era. I grew up in an era where giving a fuck was was not an option. You never gave a fuck. You just did whatever the fuck you wanted. Couldn't nobody tell you any differently. Do I still live like that now? To a certain extent. But but anyways, I'm getting old. I'm 30. But anyways, though, that's just gonna about do it for this one, man. Most definitely, man. The Y2K era is, in my personal opinion, it was the best era. Everything, movies, TV shows, culture, just everything, bro. The music. Never be another time like it, bro. Now we all PC'd up. Now everybody all inclusive now. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's like, damn, I can't have an opinion no more. It's like you can't even have an opinion no more. Having an opinion will have you up out of here. You have an opinion on something or someone. It's like, damn, you a hater or you get canceled. It's crazy. But I digress though. But anyways, though, that's just gonna about do it for this one. I'll see y'all the next one. Till then, peace out.